most kids content is made to make sure that kids never stop engaging with it. And that really creates this flywheel of addiction. And a lot of that comes from the hit of dopamine that kids get from really fast, bright, loud, overstimulating videos. These things can actually sometimes be a detriment. We want PokPok to feel like an extension of the living room floor in a parent's home that's filled with toys.
Is everything over? Shall we give up on the gaming industry now? Shall we stop trying making games, building studios and companies that have the power to positively impact the future lives of millions of players, professional and humans? No, we don't. In this special track of Rise and Play, I will be focusing on the unspoken topics around building game companies, founders teams, fundraising, pitching, rebounding after closing your studio, company or losing your job. By bringing guests who are going through the same storm of 2024 like you and keep fighting. I will also share openly my own process, trials and error, and step-by-step building the new game company Killen as the first-time CEO of a game company. I believe we are stronger together, and we don't have to go through the storm alone, because at Rise and Play, we are not alone. Oh, and one last thing. As you feel supercharged by listening to this episode, it will mean a lot to me, and if you haven't done it yet, that you hit the follow button. It will help with the discovery of the show so other people can benefit from the content too. Thanks, and now let's get to the episode. So hi everyone, another episode of Rise and Play, and today I'm pleased to be with Melissa. We connected online long time ago, busy time, probably COVID time, but actually really connected at the Rise and Play and Sunlow networking event we hosted in San Francisco GDC, and had a panel to talk about difficult turmoil as leaders in the gaming industry, and very interesting conversation. And then from conversation to another, it's like, okay, Melissa, I need you on the podcast, and here she is. So quick intro about Melissa. So Melissa Cash is the co-founder and CEO at Pok Pok, an Apple design award-winning company redefining how kids play and learn on devices. So before, Melissa served as a product designer for the Walt Disney Company, was head of operation at renowned game studio Snowman, and recently named one of the top 100 most powerful Canadians in 2024. I may ask about that later. I'm kind of curious about what that entails. And worth mentioning, because it's important to mention, while being an entrepreneur, building a company, growing a company, Melissa is a mother and a mentor for women and underrepresented founders. So welcome, Melissa, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sophie. I'm so happy to be here.
So before we start actually with a more official question, I need to ask, what are the top most powerful Canadian? What's the nomination about? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Maclean's magazine is kind of Canada's Time magazine, if you will. And they just did their report on the most powerful Canadians in 2024. And I landed on it. I'm still in a bit of shock, honestly, but they basically have a bunch of different categories around like entertainment and housing and politics and education. And I'm actually very proud that PokPok landed in the education category, not the tech category, only because at the true core of our business is our educational impact. So yeah, I was very excited to be on there. And it's kind of crazy because yeah, like Ryan Reynolds is on there and like very famous Canadians who I feel like have a lot more power than I do. But I think in this context, they're speaking to the power of PokPok, not the power of Melissa Cash per se.
Yeah, amazing. Should get that picture where you are side by side with Ryan Reynolds, right?
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds actually and Ryan Gosling. So both of our famous Ryans.
Oh, both, yes.
They're both on there. They're both Canadian. And that is now my new life goal. So I'm going to get a photo with me in between the two Ryans and frame it on my wall. Stay tuned.
Love it. I'll follow that closely. Amazing. So now we can get to our real question, but I'm happy to have knowledge about that now. I'm very curious, before we get into PokPok, of course, very important part of the conversation today, more about you. Where were you in your life when you started PokPok? What have you done exactly before? What was the transition point? I always love to hear before the entrepreneurial journey, what people have done before.
Sure, I'm happy to share that. I started my career in marketing and PR. I worked at a really tiny startup, if you would even call it that, in Germany where I was living at the time, which is, I know where you are too, which is kind of cool. And yeah, I was working at a little like fashion startup and doing marketing and PR there. And then I ended up working for Disney for almost 5 years, designing physical products for young children, mostly hardware in the baby and toddler space. So things like bottles and strollers and
Mm.
clothing and all of that stuff. And then just before we started Pok Pok, I moved back to Canada after spending almost 7 years living abroad. And when I got to Toronto, I got a job at another startup, also doing marketing. But right at the same time, honestly, I ended up meeting my co-founders through my brother and his business partner at Snowman, which I'm sure some people listening may have
Mhm.
heard of. They're the indie game studio behind Alto's Adventure, Skate City, Where Cards Fall, a bunch of other really amazing games. And so my co-founders were working with Snowman at the time when they had their second child, and their idea to make something that would be really gentle and educational and almost like that first perfect introduction to technology for their 2-year-old son. And that is when we started talking. And I realized I had to quit my job and do this instead
Mm.
because it really sounded too interesting and too important to ignore.
Mm. I'd like to spend a bit of more time on that moment where you decided with your co-founder to jump and at least try, like it was important mission. So if I understood correctly, you were both working as Snowman at the time and you started this discussion. What was the turning point, which from a discussion was we have to do that or we have to try that, build, this prototype, build this company? I'm very interested in the steps.
So the real setup was this. Esther and Mateus, who are husband and wife and are my co-founders, were both freelancing for Snowman at the time. And I was no one related to, like, my brother's the founder of Snowman. So I was involved sort of by extension through him, but I had helped the company with a little bit of PR before I started my other job. So I had like definitely tinkered around in the business for a while. But it was my brother Ryan who actually kind of put all the pieces together with his co-founder Jordan. Esther Mateus came to them and said, "Hey, we can't find anything good on the App Store for our young child that we feel really good about sharing with him. He loves his busy book, which is, one of those books with like tons of different pictures, but no words typically. And we think we can make something for him. And we want to work on this on the weekends as a hobby project. Is that okay?" Because it could have been a little bit of a conflict of interest. And Ryan and Jordan saw that and was like, "Wow, this is amazing. Like, you can definitely work on it, but it might actually be a little bit more than just a small hobby project." And Ryan was like, "You should meet my sister. She just came back from Germany, worked at Disney for 5 years and has been in the kid space for a long time. So she might be able to help." And that's when I kind of got involved and I met them and realized that the idea for Pok Pok that they had was so strong, but it was also just the like impetus for this like much wider mission around reimagining what digital play for young children can really be. But we all knew this wasn't really something that would fit into the Snowman portfolio. And more importantly, honestly, it was venture backable. It was something that we saw as like the very first step in a long line of digital solutions for children that kind of reinvent the way they interact with technology. So
Mm.
we quickly realized, like, if we're going to do this, it has to be its own company. And then we were very, very lucky to have, Ryan and Jordan say, "Okay, like if we want to do this, let's all do it." And so I quit my job and it was really scary, honestly. But I knew in my heart we were the best people to do this. And so everything that I was terrified of was really not as terrifying as the ambition that I felt to make it work. So
Mm.
my big first step though was really learning about the apps and games business. I had never touched that space in my entire career. And while I would be working with a bunch of folks who had, I really needed to understand that as the CEO of the company. So I quit my job and ended up working for Snowman for about a year as the director of operations, helped scale that team, launch a couple products, and really understand the apps and games world firsthand. And I was really lucky and I'm super privileged to have had an older brother who was like, "Come learn the business," basically, and get paid for it. So that was really an exceptional experience for me. And then during that time, we, sort of incubated Pok Pok at night and on the weekends, and then decided, okay, now now we have enough of an idea of what we want to make. And now I felt like I was really standing on my own 2 feet and understood this industry enough to lead a company through it. And so we decided to officially like start the company at that point. So it was a very non-traditional path, I will admit, and a super fortunate one as well.
Very nice. So several elements of that worth mentioning here, where you acknowledged that you had a gap of skills to get into crystallizing the company that early, and then you committed to do a year to learn. So I think this is a very good practice, like discipline and patience, because indeed, if you get into the business, I mean, these days, this is going through fundraising. There's just no mercy if you don't have adequate experience. You need to have adequate experience. So that's great that you learn while also building the product, understanding what you were building, and also to groom with your co-founder, because your co-founder at the time was also still working as Snowman, right? Because that was my second question. How did you groom the co-founder team? How many were you at the time? 2, 3?
Yeah. So Esther and Matthias ended up actually basically just shifting their work focus. So they wrapped up what they were working on at Snowman and then immediately started to prioritize PokPok full time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually 5 founders. So it's Esther, Matthias, myself, and then Ryan and Jordan from Snowman. And Ryan and Jordan's role is very strategic, but they're a little bit more behind the scenes on things. So they don't work in the company full time at this point, but they were really instrumental, especially at the earlier stages and still today with many things that we do. So I would say Esther and I run the day-to-day of the company together. She's our chief creative officer. Her husband is right there alongside her as our like head of design, and they really own the product piece. And then I own the business, and Ryan and Jordan and I will strategize regularly on what we want to do and how we're going to do it.
Okay, I didn't know that part of the story. So having seen a good bunch of deck, it's true that it's less common these days that I've seen teams, 5 co-founders, but it makes sense the way you formed the evolution from Snowman to PokPok. So as you decided to move to build really PokPok full time, what was that at the time? A product, a platform? Your audience, I would love to hear more about the product and the name even. What's the origin of the name?
Esther and Matthias came up with the name because PokPok was this like funny made up word that they started using when their son James was very, very little. He was like, I think a couple weeks old, and they were just trying to make him laugh, and they were trying to figure out any way possible to make him laugh. I don't know, that first baby laugh is so just delicious. And they were trying everything. And eventually what worked was poking his little cheek and saying, "Pok, pok, 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 pok." And we actually caught it on film, and he threw up after. It was really funny. And so we actually have it on our YouTube channel now. And so we decided to start the company. They were like, it has to be Pok Pok. It's just so synonymous with joy and laughter and family. And we also, on a more practical side of things, really wanted something that young toddlers who are just learning how to talk can say, and having that kind of repeated word and those hard consonants really just lean into, a toddler's skill set at maybe age 2. And so, it just felt like the right move for us.
Mm-hmm. And what was your fundraising journey at the time? Did you bootstrap? Did you had an initial funding? And what did you build, in the different phases, early years of a company?
Yeah, I mean, we had a very unique start in that sense. So we actually spent almost 2 years developing the app before we launched it, which is very abnormal, I think, especially in mobile for like this type of product where usually you don't have that long of a cycle. But we were really fortunate to have the space in our own like financial situations to do that. So the first 2 years were really experimental. We started with 6 toys and really spent a ton of time testing them with young children to figure out where the balance between fun, engagement, and addiction was. Because we really wanted kids to have the best time or they weren't going to play with it. We wanted it to be really engaging so that they would come back to it and we could build a viable business. But we did not want them to get addicted to it. And that's a huge core value of PokPok as an organization. And so the first 2 years were really all about playing. So we built a ton of toys. We wanted to launch with 6, but I think we built 8 or 9. And some of them were much, some of them never saw the light of day, let's just say. And it was really a fun time. We raised a pre-seed round during that process, which was fairly big for a pre-seed. It was almost $1 million. And that really let us make our first hires and have that flexibility for creative thinking and creative space before we were really pressured to make a lot of money with it. And then we ended up raising a seed round in May of 2022. So about 1 year after we launched, almost to the day actually, is when we closed. And that was really to then scale what we had seen was already working and start investing in marketing and other things.
So you did spend more time in the research, understanding the audience. I don't know that much today in-depth education market, but I did interview and spend time with other companies in the intersection of games and education. You mentioned about the problem that you wanted to solve to bring technology in a new way, for kids and without the addiction, and some of the not necessarily competitors, but other players in the market. I think of Toka, for example, that are very games. I wonder who's the real audience for those products. Is it the parents? Is it the kids? What's the business model? Because it's been also a very controversial one. When you go to free to play, it's a little weird. Premium, I don't know. So if you could just give us an overview, because myself, I don't even know about the whole ecosystem.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the very unique thing about designing a game or a product like this for children is that typically your user is not your customer. So our users are the children. PokPok targets kids ages roughly 2 to 7, 2 to 8. And they're not paying for the app. They're not making the decision to download it. And we don't ever market to them or really speak much to them directly from a business point of view. We're talking to their parents. And I think about 95% of the time, it's to the mom. So moms are really our core customer.
Yes.
And it makes the entire journey more complicated because if they're not engaged, you can't just hit a 4-year-old with a push notification because they can't even read it. And they might not even be anywhere near a device to even notice that it goes off. And if a parent sees that, they might be nowhere near their child, or it could come at like a completely wrong time. So it's a very complicated marketing system to really build around. And that's why we chose a subscription model. We knew that we wanted to create something that was so pure so that a child would never see an ad, a pop-up for an in-app purchase, or anything other than the actual play. There's zero language in PokPok and no menus, rules, or instructions at all, specifically for this reason. Because if you give your 3-year-old an iPad to keep them busy and help them learn something while you make dinner, you do not want to be called over every 30 seconds because they're stuck. So that was a huge design piece for us. And also when it came to figuring out the business model. So PokPok has a hard paywall. That means we do offer a 7-day free trial, but you have to commit to a monthly or an annual subscription for that to activate. And of course, like any other subscription, if you cancel within the 7 days, we won't charge you. And then our sort of business goals are really to re-engage the parents and make sure that they understand the value of PokPok on an ongoing basis, to make sure that our updates every month are really high value so that they see the merit of paying for the subscription. And our whole marketing customer journey really is directed to the parents. And the children are just the ones who get to kind of enjoy the labors of their checkbook, if you will.
Yeah. And this is where the part is tricky. I was interviewing last year an Indian company, Supernova, with an AI tutor to teach English. And the CEO was exactly sharing that the difference about the customer and the user and convincing the parents. But for example, for a teacher to learn English, the goal is very clear, right? So you see if your kid is making progress, and then, okay, oh good, it's a good use of money, time. So here I wonder, first, the parents, the audience, where are they? Where's the geography of your product? And what are the main concerns, resistance, blockers for parents, which I'm sure there are with tech subscriptions. I heard that 10 years ago. I'm still sure there's still some barriers. So I'm curious also, what are the challenges when you have parents as customers with especially digitalized app product for kids?
Great question. So because PokPok is language free, it's completely accessible to children anywhere on earth.
Mm-hmm.
But our core demographic typically is in the United States and North America in general, as well as Western Europe, Australia, mainly the English speaking markets. And I think primarily that's just because of the marketing strategies that we've been using, and we've been focusing really on English markets for the beginning, but we actually have users all over the world. So in every country where there's an app store, we have users, which is pretty cool because ultimately for PokPok, our goal is to bring it to everybody all over the world. And In terms of barriers, Sophie, there are a lot. I'm a mom, so I can really vouch when I say that like every day your child's well-being is really top of mind, whether that's like, are they eating enough vegetables? Did they poop? Did they make friends? Did they have fun today? Are they healthy? Do they have a cold? What is that new sneeze that they're doing? Are they getting sick? Like you're just constantly worrying about them. And a huge part of that narrative is screen time and technology. So we're not going to be getting away from that. Like the technology is here to stay. And so the number one concern parents tend to have is that technology is going to be a detriment to their child's development and upbringing, and that it could cause more and like deeper addiction if they do something that's play based rather than passive. So it's a super valid concern. And studies do show that children under the age of 2 should really not be spending much time on a screen. But the realities are that many kids are. And I think the number one reason is really just parenting is one of the hardest jobs in the world. And like any job, you lean on the tools you have. I use Notion and Slack and email to get through my day. And as a parent, I use toys and my iPad and my family to help me get through my day. Because if I'm able to function and relax and be present with my son, then I'm a better mom. So it's natural that parents rely on the tools around them. And the tools today happen to be technological. That being said, there are a lot of challenges when it comes to kids' content because most kids' content is made to make sure that kids never stop engaging with it. And that really creates this flywheel of addiction. And a lot of that comes from the hit of dopamine that kids get from really fast, bright, loud, overstimulating videos or video games with a lot of gamification, winning and losing, points to score. A lot of that can be healthy competition, but a lot of it can also be very overwhelming, especially for kids under the age of 5 who are undergoing such rapid brain development that these things can actually sometimes be a detriment. Not always, but I think the main sort of thesis really here and the way that we think about it at PokPok is we want PokPok to feel like an extension of the living room floor in a parent's home that's filled with toys. So if your kid is playing with blocks on the floor or they're playing with the PokPok blocks, their brains are doing the same work. So they're thinking about cause and effect, gravity, problem solving, creativity. They're developing so many really important skills for life, not just for school, through this play. And whether it happens on a device or in real life, sometimes doesn't make a world of difference, but sometimes it also does. And so our whole mantra at PokPok is actually like, we don't want your kids to play PokPok all day, every day. In fact, we would much rather them go outside and play in the mud or meet friends or play with their physical toys. But there are so many moments where having a digital toy can come in really handy. And it also really empowers kids to have the space to do whatever they want without the fear of failing or the risk of getting hurt or, the challenge for parents of having your kid running around the house in a place that's maybe not necessarily safe for them. So, I mean, I'm just thinking of my son is in this phase right now where he'll run through the house, but our entire house isn't really perfectly toddler proof. So really he shouldn't be in certain rooms without my husband or I. But when we have to get things done and we want him to just be in one room, like stationary, sometimes a puzzle does the trick. Sometimes a book does the trick, but sometimes it doesn't. And so PokPok or other digital tools can be really helpful to get your kids to be like engaging in meaningful play and learning, but also being stationary and content. And I think the number one use case for screen time tends to be travel. So those moments on airplanes and all of that. So I think that the whole like screen time discussion is one that we have a lot internally. It's one that, like our community has. And I think it's really just about the content. Like you can eat candy every day for your whole life and you'll be really unhealthy. But if you only ever eat broccoli, you might not love life the way that everybody else does. So we kind of like to compare PokPok to bananas. Like it's like any healthy diet, right? You need all of the food groups. And so PokPok is a little bit sweet. It's fun. And it has that like really exciting interest for young kids, but it's also extremely healthy. So if you have a banana, it's not the same as having a bag of gummy bears. Like they're both sweet, but one is actually good for you.
I'm learning a lot through your answer about the way to think about the product, which is way beyond a game, just a game, because the impact, on the real life and also very young age for children. You talk about it really in terms of journey, like a kid journey and how the device or the toy fits in the daily habits. I like the idea really of a banana. And I understand also the concern from parents where there's an interesting point here where, as you said, the mother is the main consumer, like target audience. And maybe there's a reality where she wants to break, as simple as that. And there's also, of course, something you want good for a kid, but, like understanding the psychology of your target. So this is where there's an interesting part, which is not so much educational, but more psychological. And if you talk to the moms, like we allow you to have a break without feeling guilty, So there's a part of that I can sense as well, which is not the most obvious thing when you look at education. I think a lot around the kid and something good, healthy, but the reality is you have the barrier of the parent and the decision maker before.
Yeah, we have to solve the problem for both. So
Yeah.
the kids' problem might be like, I'm bored. I want to do something fun. And so Pok Pok is there. But the real problem we're solving at the top of the journey is for the parent. It's like, how do you get through the day? How do you get through this flight? How do you introduce technology to your child in a safe and healthy way? And the kids get all the benefit, but the parents have that added bonus of a little bit of help.
Yeah. I don't know that much about the market, the space, but I believe it's competitive. Like when I think of players, we are competing for time with other entertainment content, I guess for kids with all the toys of the world, and I'm sure a lot of games and apps as well. So is it more a marketing question or is it also a content question? I'm quite curious. So how do you, make your position in the space?
For us, the number one differentiator is the content. It's the product itself. It's just very unique and different from what's out there. And that can work for and against us. So it works for us because obviously we're extremely differentiated and people are always curious about the next new method of whatever it is. But it can work against us because a lot of people have never seen something like this before. So one of the biggest challenges we have is actually explaining the value of this type of learning to parents because it's not the traditional rote learning that they're used to seeing where kids are basically memorizing something and then regurgitating it back out. So that is a big barrier for us as much as it is a massive differentiator. And similarly, a lot of parents and adults in general, we've lost our sense of wonder. So if it's raining, our instinct is to like run inside, get the umbrella and stay dry. And if you're a kid, your instinct is to like take off your rain boots and go barefoot in a puddle and just see what happens and like enjoy being wet and playing in that space. And so that similar analogy really connects to Pok Pok because a lot of parents will open the app for the first time and they just don't get it. They're like, well, what's the goal? How do you do this correctly? And we always just say, hand it to your toddler and they'll show you because they're not going to question, how do I do this right? How do I do this wrong? What's the point? What's the goal? They're just going to explore and follow their nose and see what happens. And so getting over that as a parent and an adult, I think is actually one of our biggest challenges at the top of the funnel when parents enter the app and they're like, okay, wait, what? And so it's something that really differentiates us. And overall, it's all very positive, but it does come with its challenges as well. And then on the marketing side, we definitely can't compete with some of the budgets of our competitors at the big children's entertainment companies that I'm sure we all know. But what we can do is listen to our community really well, iterate extremely fast. We have no red tape. So like if somebody has an idea or a parent emails us and says, hey, can you make a train toy? The answer is usually like, yeah, of course. We'll do it next week. Maybe not next week, but next quarter. So we really try to stay differentiated there by just like leveraging our community and our marketing and giving them what they're asking for. And then also just our messaging in general, I think is a little bit different. One thing that's really important, particularly to Esther and I, is breaking some of the barriers behind digital content in general when it comes to children and parenting. So a lot of us care about where our food is sourced or where our clothing was produced, but no one's really asking like, who made that game I just played and what are their core values and what's their story and how did they actually make this? And when it comes to education and kids, there couldn't be a more sensitive topic. So we really want to open the vault there and show families like how we make it, who our team are, why we do things the way that we're doing them. And so a lot of our marketing, especially on the organic side, is about like lifting the curtain a little bit and showing families who's behind the product and why that's relevant, because this is the age when kids are so impressionable and they're forming all of their biases and assumptions about the world. And we have a huge responsibility to get that right. So, if one of us has an idea, it can be implemented in the app the following month and in a children's hands the next day. So it really matters, I think, who we are, because we're really influencing the next generation through PokPok, and we take that responsibility very seriously.
Yeah, it's good to remind about that. And you say it in a way that is very conscious. I'm sure you're very conscious about it. And that leads me to ask about the team. What kind of team does it require to build an educational product? I don't know. Do you have also support from, people coming from more educational background? So I'm curious about composition of the team, even the size.
So the team is about 16 people right now, but we're growing a lot this year. Our team is about half on the creative side. So like art, sound, game development, design, and like tech. And then the rest are more on the marketing and growth sort of business side of things. We made a very conscious decision early on, which is not to hire an educator.
Mm-hmm.
Like dun dun dun. That sounds very dramatic. But the reason for that is we didn't want just one teacher's opinion, let's say, because there's so many different methodologies of learning. There's a lot of bias that comes with just one educator's opinion. And so instead we work with educational advisors on a rolling basis. So we have a huge group of people, everything from your sort of, I'm going to say average kindergarten teacher to pediatric occupational therapist to a neuroscientist to like early childhood educators at the PhD level. We've even spoken to like professor of creativity a couple of times. There's a lot of really cool knowledge out there. And so we're constantly finding new folks to work with and take part in the development process with us. And then on the flip side, we also get to work with people who you would never expect. Like for our little town in PokPok, we launched it as like a small village, and then we decided to grow it into like a big bustling kind of urban town and make that little village more of like the suburb. But we were like, wait, we don't really know how to design a city perfectly. And also not just today's cities, but the future, because we want kids to see a little bit ahead. So we hired a New York City urban planner named Sarah Kaufman, and she consulted for us and helped us design this city in like a real way that makes sense, that implemented green space and a lot of environmentally conscious features like bike lanes, and all of the cars in PokPok don't make a vroom vroom sound because maybe they're electric. And so like all those little nuances that are built into the app come from not only our team, but also these educators that we work with and advisors.
Yeah, it sounds really good to have that diversity of perspective in the end, and not just that one point of education. Yeah, that I understand. That would be actually quite scary because and this is when you, back to the responsibility, I can totally see that. And I can feel for you that level of responsibility of influencing future generation, so parents giving you the trust as well with the children and the product that they interact with. I'd like to spend the last questions on your journey building the company. So I understand it is your first company, right, as a CEO. Okay, so it's been 3 years and you've been successfully so far going through the whole journey of prototyping, raising seed, and reflecting back on this journey of entrepreneur. So you as the CEO, what are the things you wish you knew when you started, or if you had to start now, I was curious about that.
There's so many things. Honestly, I wish I knew a lot. I think at a high level, I wish I knew that so many people out there are also figuring it out as they go, and that's totally okay and normal. I think there's a huge fear and a lot of imposter syndrome around starting a company, especially for women. And my advice would just be to try to ignore it as much as you can, because frankly, everyone else is in the exact same boat. Even just the other day, I was chatting with another founder who's raising money, and I was kind of walking through it a little bit and just being like a shoulder for them. And they're like, yeah, but this is brutal. This is what's going on. And this is their first time fundraising. And I was like, I hate to break it to you, but we all have that every week in a fundraise. It's totally normal. And I think there's just a lot of almost isolation too, because it can be very lonely to run a
Mm.
company and you're not like on the ground with your team every day. You're kind of like holed up doing other things that maybe they don't even see. So I think a lot of that is just stuff that floated around my mind a lot in the early days that I wish I had known other people were going through the same thing and that it was very normal. In a practical sense, I wish we had implemented different data practices from the beginning. So, one thing I was like, oh, we can build our own analytics system. But in hindsight, that was a terrible idea. Like I said before, I'm a big believer in working in our areas of genius, and that was not one of them. So, we lost several months of data when we ended up switching over to like a proper third party analytics tool. And that sucks because every company is only as strong as their data. So, that was a big lesson learned. And then one other really important thing I wish I had known earlier. I mean, to be honest, I knew this going in, but I wish I had taken it more to heart and prioritized it more, which is network. So network really matters if you're starting a company. If you hate networking and you are very uncomfortable speaking to other people and putting yourself out there, I would still encourage you to find a way or find a co-founder who loves that, because it's so crucial to making moves in the industry, whether that's fundraising. And if it's not fundraising, it's hiring, it's retaining the right people, building relationships with cohorts that are in similar businesses to you to help you through the day to day. Without my network, I would be honestly nowhere. And I've invested in it for a really long time, but I wish I'd prioritized it more in the first year of PokPok. Even when we decided we're going to start the company, we were very obsessed with keeping it a secret. But in hindsight, I think it might have been more beneficial to share that story to get more support and build my network, because I've been super fortunate to have a really great network now. And I'm really invested in continuing to build it. But it's so insane how much of a role it plays in every part of your life, which I'm sure you can attest to with Rise and Play and all of the work that you do. Like, a lot of the battles that you make, I think, every day as an entrepreneur. Because if you don't know the answer, someone in your network will. If you need capital, someone in your network will have it or know someone who has it. And if you want to make a hire, just pick up the phone, open Slack, find the person who might be able to intro you. Like, I also take like that very seriously from the receiving end and giving back and trying to be a support for other people who are looking for resources, because so many people have helped me along the way. So yeah, networking.
Yeah. And I double down on that. You're very correct. And it's that kind of investment that has a long-term and compounding effect. You don't benefit from it until several years or until you're in trouble. And then you realize, oh, actually, it's kind of nice to have a network.
Yeah. I'll never forget one of the first VCs I ever pitched, ever. He said, I love you. I love your product. I love your business. He's like, but nobody knows who you are. So you're never going to be able to hire the best people and get the best venture capital. He's like, so I'm going to pass. I was like, what?
Wow.
And it really just burned into my brain. And I remember calling two of my friends who work in startups and are also kind of like mentors to me. And I was like, can you believe this? And one of them was like just as infuriated as I was. And I was like, yeah, they're right. And it was like such a hard lesson to learn, but it's why things like this, like McLean's top 100 most powerful people thing matters, because now somebody knows who I am. And if they're presented with two deals and they're identical in every way, but one person is well known and respected and the other person nobody's ever heard of, it's much easier to give money to the people that are well known. So it's a grind and it's not necessarily fair, but unfortunately, it's just the way things are working right now. And so yeah, I'll never forget that guy.
Yeah, that's a rough feedback, but like you said, this is how, we make our judgment. And it's a very good reminder for also women listening, where we usually don't prioritize networking, but we see the lack of it much later. So I repeat that as well. So I'm glad that you remind about that very important point. Second question is about, you touched on that actually, the Rise and Play event at GDC, about juggling between family life and entrepreneurial life. How do you do it? How do you do this?
With very tired eyes. How do I do it? I don't even know. Honestly, like some days I just black out. I'm like, how did I survive that day? The real truth is you can't do both perfectly every day. So I try to measure my success on a weekly basis. So I'm not like, was I a great mom today? Or was I a great CEO today? Sometimes the answer is just frankly no. And so I really just try to look at it with like a little bit more of a broader scope and think like, did I have a good balanced week? Because like today, for example, it's a CEO day for me. Unfortunately, I saw my son for 45 minutes this morning. I won't see him till tomorrow. But yesterday was mom day. I had a beautiful morning with him. And then in the evening, I had time with him as well. So like, it was really more of like a mom day. And I even like stopped work early to go pick him up from daycare because the sun was out and I felt like it. So I think just acknowledging that it's really hard and that every day isn't going to feel the way you want it to feel is one of the biggest things that really helps me get through it. And then the real practical thing is just help. I mean, I have a partner, thank God, who I love and who's an amazing dad. I have a team who's amazing. I have friends and family who help with both the company and my family. And ultimately, I think it's about just being generous to yourself. I need to actually take this advice. So it's good you're having me answer this question because I always need to look in the mirror and double check that I actually am taking this advice, which is that it's not black and white. It's so complicated. Being a mother and being a business leader those are two full-time jobs. So it's impossible to do both of them well all the time. And I think we all just need to cut ourselves a little bit of slack because yeah, it's hard and not everybody has help or opportunity. And it's just very messy, honestly. So I don't know if any of that was good advice, but I think the thesis is really that it's hard and we have to give ourselves grace and get help when we can.
Yeah, I think it was very well summarized. And having asked that same question to other, mother and CEOs, it was similar. You do your best and then you forgive yourself, give yourself some slack. And then you look at perspective on a broader basis to not try to be so hard on yourself. It's hard. And at last, what are you looking forward with your company? Or I don't know if there's something in your life for the coming months.
Well, I'm really, really excited for sort of the next phase of PokPok. We're expanding the product. We're growing the team. We're going to continue investing in our community and really building out what PokPok actually means for families. So I'm just so excited to see how that shakes out and how our growth continues to progress. And on a personal level, I'm really looking forward to finding more balance in my life, getting some help. We're going to be hiring our first sort of administrative role in the company, which feels like a huge milestone when you get to that stage where you're like, okay, now I can hire someone to help me kind of personally. So I'm really excited for that role. We're going to be posting it very soon on LinkedIn. So like this spring. And I'm just pumped. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's so much work to do. And I'm really excited. I'm excited to see my son continue to grow. He's now entered his PokPok era. He's 2. So playing with him is truly such a joy and it's hysterical as well. And I'm becoming a better CEO for that as well. Just being so ingrained in the product with him now is really cool. And I'm excited to see what other people are building, honestly. Like I love watching innovation in this space and I welcome more competitors because the thing about PokPok is like, there's room for a lot of us, but kids just need better content. So if somebody else wants to come in and make something awesome, like they should. It's not like just because I have a really big tree over here doesn't mean there can't be a really big tree next to us. We can all bloom and grow and help families.
And that's a very big vision, looking at it with abundance and for the mission first, rather than just, you and your company owning the space. I really like the last notes, what you shared at last. All right, I did ask everything I wanted to ask about PokPok, how to crack education / games, app, digital evolution. Thanks a lot, Melissa, for your enthusiasm, your energy today. And I look forward to seeing the next steps and growth for PokPok.
Thanks, Sophie. Same to you. I'll keep following along in your journey as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am growing a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders because we have so much more we can learn from each other. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate the show on Spotify or your other favorite podcast platform. It will help other growing leaders to discover the show and benefit from the valuable insights. If you would like to grow rapidly your leadership skills, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io where you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership and other resources that I offer. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time,